it's one of the rare instances where you're seeing like an LSP contract replaced by a full AI solution, and we should get ready for this happening probably more often in the future. And we're back with Slater Pod. Hi, Esther.
Hi, Florian.
Another news pod after what feels like a long break. Must have been like 4 weeks. So
It's been a while.
it's been a while. Yeah, time to catch up. For those who have not bought a ticket yet for SlaterCon Zurich, do so now. October 4th, Sheraton, Zurich West. One of the very few high rises we have. We, made fun of Zurich's non-existing high rises on the last pod. We'll do it again. So this is one of the very, very few that we have here. And we have a long list of partners now. So for the conference, we localize RWS, LanguageWire, Tarjuma, SuperText, DeepL, Phrase, and Language Inspired. Kind of a mix between panels and also partners that are coming in from for an exhibitor space. I think we have a couple more slots left. So if anybody's interested, reach out to Andrew. And we're probably going to be selling out. So you want to get your ticket as soon as possible. I think once people are coming back from whatever vacation they were on, I think we're going to sell out relatively soon. So again, if you do want to be there, probably buy your ticket sooner rather than later. On the dock today, AI replaces LSP, Meta's warning about their LLM. And then, Esther, we're going to review a bunch of financial results from Straker, Zoo, Keywords, Honyaku, and then you're going to catch us up on a few M&A transactions, Elon, LanguageWire, Phrase, and Language.io, right?
Correct.
Correcto. Okay, so first, briefly, a story we covered last week. One of the very few stories that it was very clear cut that an LSP was being replaced by tech solutions. So apparently in where is it? In Baltimore, Maryland. Never been. Have you been?
I have not. Nope.
No, me neither. Apparently the police there replaced LanguageLine with, or potentially part of a contract of LanguageLine. We don't know the exact detail, with a company called NWN Carousel, Massachusetts-based cloud communications company. Contracts worth $6.5 million. This NWN Carousel firm is like 1,200 employees, $1 billion in revenue. And what they're going to be doing is providing what they called AI-enabled multilingual emergency 911 services. Apparently, the city handles over 1.3 million emergency calls a year. 1.3 million.
Is that a lot? Sounds like a lot, but then I live in London.
Sounds like a lot of emergency call for a city the size of Baltimore. I don't know what's going on in Baltimore.
Do you not watch The Wire?
Is that in Baltimore?
I think so, right?
Could be. Philly or Baltimore? I don't know. Maybe Baltimore. Well, okay. Yeah, I did watch The Wire.
It's a few years old, though.
It's like 10, 15 years old. Anyway, so this new system will offer Baltimore's public safety agents, as they call them in residence, quote-unquote, automated text translation in over 140 languages, along with other features, and they claim that that reduces the emergency response time by 90%. So they're switching from like what they call like a traditional kind of live translator, live interpreter, OPI, obviously over the phone, to AI, to MT. I think they're not going to be doing direct speech-to-speech translation. I think it's like some type of like text to speech to text, and then I'm not sure how this exactly works, but it's one of the rare instances where you're seeing like an LSP contract replaced by a full AI solution, and we should get ready for this happening probably more often in the future. That said, though, just to kind of go back to LanguageLine, in like a February 2023 call, the CEO of the parent company's, Teleperformance's CEO said that they're expecting a very solid year with LanguageLine because there's more and more immigration in the US, and that's obviously a massive demand driver for LanguageLine. So I don't think LanguageLine should be worrying too much, at least for 2023. but generally interesting that this is starting to happen. 911 calls are probably as critical as they get.
Let's see how it goes. They're going to have to review how it all pans out, aren't they, at some point?
And at the same time, there was something like Cyricom won another contract. So this OPI isn't going to go anywhere for the foreseeable future, but still an interesting one-off case here. Now, switching over to large language models, one of the things we keep hearing more and more is that, these open source models are really going to, or are really starting to rival or eat into the pie of the kind of the ChatGPT, which is, from OpenAI, but closed AI, because, it's obviously proprietary, the models that ChatGPT is running on. So one of the major competitors there is Llama, which is Facebook/Meta's LLM, which they open sourced. So Llama 1, they open sourced back in February 2023. And now Llama 2 is out, came out like in late July. One of the, the chief AI scientists there, who you should really give a follow on Twitter, Jan LeCun, called it huge, a huge launch. And it's open source. It's out there. It's free for research, free for commercial use. And a lot of people will start building on this. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because there's so many of these LLMs coming out. Well, they said that a training corpus with a majority in English, and actually I think 92 or 93% of Llama's training corpus.
90-something.
Yeah, we put the chart there. Yeah, nearly 90% in English. So a training corpus was 90% in English. And then Facebook said that the model may not be suitable for use in other languages. That's what they the warning they put in the documentation there. All right, so large language model, mostly suitable for English. So maybe that's why some of these other LLMs also kind of do, don't perform super well sometimes in non-English tasks other than translation. We did unpack translation performance of LLMs, from A to Z and Z to A. But so yeah, interesting warning there by Facebook. I wonder how many people in the language industry, like in the core language industry, are building on these models.
Survey time.
Survey time. Yes, we just finished the ALC survey, by the way, which you're going to present at ALC, right?
Yes, in Portland in September.
What date is that?
I think it's 20th to the 22nd.
Shout out to ALC. Join the ALC conference in Portland and get the exclusive presentation by Esther of our survey. We just finished it. It's a big task. All right, so that was AI in 911 settings and Llama 2 by Facebook being majority trained in English. And now we're glad that we're going back to familiar shores, which is reviewing financial statements by listed LSPs. Say more.
Yes, well, there's been a catalogue, I suppose, of financial results coming out from the listed language service providers in the past couple of weeks that we've covered editorially. So we had Straker, who released their Q1 for financial year 24. So this is the period April to June. They said revenues grew 2% to 13 million New Zealand dollars. And that was an increase of 2% from the previous quarter. For reference, their annual revenues last year, I think, were around 37 million US dollars. I mean, what's interesting I find about these financial reports and results generally is some of the commentary that it provides around, different segments, what clients are doing and thinking, and then kind of couple that with the reaction of the markets as well in terms of how the shares up or down or stagnant. So that's sort of the interesting part of it, I think. So in terms of their commentary, they were saying revenues from IBM grew. IBM, their major customer, grew more than 20% in Q1, but was still below peak levels that they saw, I think, at some point during last financial year. Europe was actually the fastest growing region for Straker with 25% growth. from the previous period, so from Q4. And they said that was linked to strong demand from institutional clients. Elsewhere, they had a challenging market in North America, but said that Lingo Tech, which is the TMS solution they acquired a couple of years ago now, that grew. Likewise, there were headwinds in APAC and Asia for Straker, and they actually said these areas were the main handbrake on stronger growth. So it seems to be a bit challenging for them there as well. Just briefly on shares, kind of around an all-time low still. I had a quick look, and market cap stands around $26 million.
It is really an all-time low. I mean, I'm looking at the chart now. Even in the depth of COVID, it was actually at 62 cents, and now it's at 59.
The lowest we saw was about 56, just around the time of the publication. So it's gone up slightly, but still, near all-time lows.
It's like $30 million market cap.
Well, compared to annual revenues of about 37 million.
Well, one-time revenue. I mean, usually listed companies trade way above that, listed LSPs. So, seems like undervalued at this point, but no investment advice from my side.
Disclaimer.
Well, yeah, they do need to just get back to, or not, they do need to get to solid profitability for this to lift.
Yeah, and consistent, I think, as well. I think that there was profitability in that quarter, though.
Yeah, but it's still technical. It's like they're using some metric that I rarely see. We spoke about it many times in the past. So that company just needs to be solid and profitable for the stock to go up. Now, we have another company that we talk about a lot, but this one's very interesting because it kind of correlates very strongly with kind of major news stories like the Hollywood strike. So what's going on at Zoo?
Yeah, Zoo Digital, so London, UK listed media localization provider. They put out their full year results for 2023, which was to the end of March 23. So had a really great year. Revenues were up 28% to $90 million and adjusted EBITDA more than doubled to more than $15 million. Likewise, in the media localization part of the business, which I think in total was about $57 million, that increased 34%. So really strong, outperformed the rest of the business there, which is media services and a few other bits. Within media localization, subtitling was up 15% and dubbing by a whopping 73%. When I spoke to the CFO and CEO, and they mentioned that I guess it's because of challenging comparables, because actually if you think back to their full year 22, it was still dubbing, I think at least in that first part of the year, was still impacted by the pandemic.
So it's a base effect.
There we go.
Lower base, higher growth.
That's setting the backdrop. Obviously now a few months, coming up for 6 months have passed since March, and they're kind of facing, as you said, some of these challenges coming out of Hollywood. On the one hand, the actors and writers strikes, and which I think in and of itself is a problem when it comes to producing disruption to production volumes, albeit hopefully temporary. On the other hand, they're also facing, they said, cost-saving measures being carried out by their clients, so major content owners, typically in Hollywood as well.
They're probably going to look for back catalog localization to save the day again, like during the pandemic.
In terms of what option do they have to try and still keep content or pushing out content to audiences, and obviously still try and retain or win more subscribers during the challenging period. Clients can obviously focus on a back catalogue, which is kind of bringing things out of the woodwork that maybe aired a long time ago, and that's something that we saw during the pandemic, that actually back catalogue content.
We must have watched all of it.
There you go. Bring back The Wire, though. I love The Wire. It's never been on Netflix, I don't think. So yeah, one option obviously is the back catalogue, but then also they could source content. The clients, streaming services, etc., could source content from overseas. So this again then is feeding into the idea of local content, which actually Netflix and others have been ramping up in terms of, I don't know, sourcing productions from, well, all over the place, but Korea, Turkey, France, Germany, etc., etc. So source content from areas that are not affected by the strikes.
And then I got into English, right?
Into English, yeah.
You also spoke to them about some of the concerns around AI and kind of the reuse of the voices and the likeness and the rights and all of that. That's super interesting. Can you just tell us a bit more, like some of the key bits there?
Yeah, hugely complex issue, but I think as we understand it, there's two broad concerns, both for actors and also for writers who are striking. On the one hand, I think they need to sort out a lot of the issues or concerns around compensation. So compensation is one big bucket, one key issue, and then the other is AI. Obviously, they're interlinked because also how are you compensated in matters of AI, and this varies between actors and also writers. So, talking to Zoo, they were saying, an actor at the moment, an actor's likeness or their voice could be reused without their consent or any compensation.
Think about it for dubbing, let's assume the AI dubbing thing is going to improve and all of that, right? And the voice cloning is going to improve. There's all of these companies that are now offering you to voice clone things in your voice plus in another language, right? So let's assume in 4 or 5 years from now, this is maybe not for prime time, but for kind of long tail shows, it works. So if you're an actor and they're taking your voice and they're training an LLM and they're voice cloning your voice, and then they have you basically AI dub yourself, you should get some money for that, right?
I mean, voice obviously is one aspect, but then your likeness. So the kind of deep fake type stuff where it legitimately looks like it's you. It's not just your voice being applied to somebody else's image to dub them into another language.
Okay, but where would your likeness in the localization process be relevant? Is it just a lip movement? No.
I suppose it removes dubbing artists from the process altogether because, okay, let's say you've got a big Hollywood star. That person is the one who's effectively, if you say performing the dubbing. I mean, only, yeah. So there will be no voice talent. There will be just actors.
Correct. But if the likeness, where's the likeness come in for dubbing?
Okay, so I mean, we're talking here about the reasons behind the strike. So talking about the actors in Hollywood, not specifically voice actors, although as we know, actors can also double up as voice talent sometimes also. So yeah, lots of challenges on the actors' side.
One of the reasons is they're concerned around maybe just a full AI version of themselves or something.
Yeah. And yes, it could be multiple languages, but also just for general content and reuse.
I'm just thinking more very narrowly, okay, so you record a show, a TV series, etc. They're taking your voice and they're creating a bunch of voice clones, and they're having these voice clones, speak French, German, Chinese, and then they AI dub your own show in your voice clone voice, right? So I guess that might be written in future actors' contracts.
I think this is what they're pushing for, really, to clarify how far can it go, what will they be compensated for, and then likewise on the side of writers, which obviously sort of slightly further removed from the localization process, other than the fact that they're the ones ultimately generating the content. They want to clarify matters of rights and ownership again for the content. So the rights to the material on which large language models are being trained. So if you've written a script and then that script is then used to train an AI, and then that AI generates content, based on the training material, and that content is then used for whatever purpose, what's the legal position and what's the ownership around that content.
All right, and so you take all of this together, and that means basically a production stop, which is not great if you're in the media localization business. And that means Zoo's shares have dropped from 207 in March this year to 63. So that's, I don't know, like 70% drop.
Yeah, it's about 65% since the start of the year. So yeah, not from the March peak. I think it's up even a bigger drop.
Because they are profitable.
And this, it seems to be a temporary, whatever things are going on in Hollywood, ultimately they will hopefully, I think there's goodwill enough to hopefully find swift resolution.
Again, no investment advice, but this seems like a pretty cheap stock right there. Let's touch very briefly on Keywords because, they're kind of moving away from the lock business generally, but also getting hammered on the stock market.
Well, they are, but I mean, they still have a huge amount of localization revenues. Can't remember the percentage exactly.
Like 20, 30, right?
I think it's bigger. Yeah, I think it's more like 40 these days, since they kind of consolidated everything. I might be wrong. But yeah, Keywords gave a trading update on their first half, so 6 months ending June 2023. They had first half revenues equating to around $419 million US dollars. And that's up 19% year on year. So again, pretty solid performance there. In addition to organic revenue growth of 10%. So they typically do quite a lot of acquisitions in a year, so they would strip out growth from acquisitions for that figure. So organic revenue growth of 10%. The Globalize unit, which is the one where they produce dubbing, voiceover, subtitling, etc., localization, QA for games. They said we've seen a more pronounced moderation, I think, compared to other areas of the business, following a very strong growth levels in the first half of 2022. They also said we've seen limited impacts, and sort of referring back to what we're talking about with Zoo. We've seen limited impact from the entertainment industry strikes in the US, but we're monitoring the situation whilst they continue. So although Keywords is majority focused on game services, but obviously it also has a quite sizable sort of 15 to 20 million US dollars of media localization revenues annually.
We're still waiting for the big acquisition or expansion there.
Maybe not now. Yeah, they'll wait and see.
Maybe they do need to do something now, something big. They also did this like revolving credit thing, 300 or 400 million, which we talked about last time. And now let's move on to the most stable company in the universe, Honyaku Center, Japanese LSP. It's like ever since I've known these guys for 15 years, and I think they've been at the same revenue level ever since.
Same market cap maybe as well. It doesn't really seem to shift. Yeah,
definitely on the revenue. I remember like meeting them the first time in Tokyo, like back in like 2008 or something, and they were like at $80 million, and they're still at $80 million, even though the yen's depreciated. So yeah, where they at the quarter, so $17 million.
Yeah, the first quarter of 2024. So that's their new financial year. Between April and June, they had 2.6 billion Japanese yen. Sounds better when you say it in JPY, but equating to 17.7 million in the first quarter. That was up around 4% year on year. I know what you mean when you say it's stable. I mean, I was reading through the results, and the message's core translation is going well. So basically, I think translation is about 75%, if not more, of the overall revenues.
It's always been like that. I mean, I met them back in time I spent in Asia, etc. So yeah, 75% of top line, some patent translations doing relatively well.
Patent translation, one of the bigger part of the business, up 14%. And then elsewhere in the business, some sort of mixed, some parts a bit softer. But mostly, yeah, modest growth, 4%.
Honyaku Center in Tokyo. Now, got couple M&A transactions and a couple of financings. I wouldn't call them funding with phrasing. I mean, somewhat funding, but more kind of financing. So, okay, talk about Elan, talk about LanguageWire.
Yeah, Elan Languages is a Belgian-based language service provider. They acquired LinguaWorld. This was at the end of June. I think we covered it in July. So German interpreting and translation business LinguaWorld. The rationale was to expand Elan languages geographically to enter the German market. Some synergies across both companies, so they both provide translation interpreting to the public sector, also across a range of verticals. Elan, which I think we might have missed at the time, actually secured backing from a French private equity firm last year in April 2022, a firm called Andera Partners. And with that, they had the goal and the plan of accelerating the company's growth, both in France, so neighboring country, and also elsewhere in Europe. And since then, they also acquired Eloquentia, which is another Belgium-based translation and interpreting provider. But yeah, this latest transaction of LinguaWorld, which actually was owned by Jetranet, prior to being acquired by Elan. Jetranet is the German translation network. So LinguaWorld, 45 employees. And in terms of revenues, I don't think we have the specific revenues from Jetranet, but they projected consolidated revenues of around $48 million for 2023. On the one hand, they're saying, trading's been good for them in 2023, but that would kind of mark quite a substantial increase from their 22 revenues that they reported as just over, around $22 million in 2022.
Good times at Elan. So LanguageWire is going to Finland.
Yeah, going to Finland. You could see it as going to Finland, or you could see it as consolidating in the Nordics, which I think is how Language talked about their acquisition of Delingua. And this happened at the end of July. So Delingua is a Finnish translation and interpreting provider that focuses on Finnish private sector as well as public sector contracts in Finland. I think, LanguageWire said the acquisition helps them to strengthen their position in the Nordic regions. Obviously, they're actually already the largest LSP there, headquartered there, I should say, by revenue. Again, as we know, LanguageWire sort of swapped its private equity backers back in 2021. Since then, they've also acquired two French translation agencies, AWS and ADT. I think ADT was just a few months ago, if I remember rightly. They're projecting combined revenues of around $88 million in 2023, with Delingua around 6.1 million euros.
And Phrase, let's move on to Phrase, to the funding side or financing side. So Phrase is, they sold the majority to the private equity firm Carlyle a couple of years ago. I think 3 years ago. This was one of the first kind of fundings or acquisitions that came through, like just post-COVID. So now they've been doing a few additional raises, and now it's like debt financing, so venture debt from a funding arm of like the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. So they have like a vehicle called CIBC Innovation Banking, and they extended 12 million euro in venture debt to Phrase. Now remember Phrase, MemSource, etc. Interesting. Venture debt. Not something we see a lot in the language industry because it's, you got to pay it back. It's not equity. So, they said they were going to use this to, further develop the Phrase localization suite, Phrase Translate. What's Phrase Translate?
It's a machine translation aggregator.
So that's like Intento-ish.
Yeah, I think so. I think it connects to 30 or so different MT engines. And
then they're what they call workflow management tool Phrase Orchestrator. They're just in a great position, frankly. I think the very sophisticated TMSs are in a great position to leverage these LLMs. Like they're sitting in the middle. Or if you own it, like LanguageWire, you're also in a good position. Because very hard to replicate that. There's other components that are easier, but like if you're Phrase and you can connect to all the MT, it doesn't really matter if you connect to an LLM or like a more narrow MT. And then of course you can leverage the LLM to, with specific prompts and implement it for the linguist to actually work in it. So got 12 more million euros to play with it and build out these different features. Another interesting one was Language.io. I don't know, will you give it a try to summarize, give the elevator pitch for Language.io?
Elevator pitch, yeah, I'm sure they'll do a better job themselves. But it's uses machine translation, very focused on the customer support area. So using MT to help monolingual customer support agents, normally English-speaking customer support agents, to communicate and interact with customers.
And they call it a Series A1, which is also something that's kind of a new thing that's popping up, right? It's kind of bridge because it's roughly the same size of whatever Series A they had before, so 8 million. And yeah, so they call it A1 instead of like the typical would have been like a $30 million Series B, but Series Bs are probably the hardest thing to come by in middle of 2023. Now, this was the biggest investor here was something called the Wyoming Venture Capital Fund, which is some state vehicle. I mean, they're based in Wyoming, so Wyoming wants to have tech companies. So maybe they felt like, hey, why don't we bridge this and make sure that Language.io continues to prosper and develop.
Yeah, I think it was the fund's first investment as well.
All right, let's see if there's more to come. So Language.io, we did have Heather on the pod about 1.5 years ago. So let's see how that pans out. And that concludes Esther's M&A and funding corner. I did jump in here a little bit. Sorry for that. All right, get your tickets for SlateCon Zurich October 4th while they're here because they're selling fast. And see you soon in Zurich or here on the pod.